Sorry, guys. 20 minutes late here because my phone decided it needed to do a vital update and reboot exactly as I was about to start my live stream. Can you guys hear me out there? Is anyone out there? Or did everyone just leave? Did you all get bored of waiting for me? Can you hear me out there? Anyone? Oh, there we go. Hello, guys. All right. So we're going to just wait a little while for people to show up now that I've started so late. Actually losing viewers now. There were like 15 of you while this thing was rebooting, and now there's 12 according to this, but all right. I guess some people were just waiting to see if I failed completely. All right, so we are live now. If any of you want to help out, spread the word out there, share in your social media that I'm live right now, share this link or whatever. Get some more people in here. So, as of now, according to YouTube, I have 8,008 subscribers. Feels like it's been a while since I did one of these, so I guess that from 7 to 8,000 took its time. It's if you're an OSR blog, that isn't that's a pretty big number actually. Like it's the OSR is a smaller subset of the hobby, and so to have that many subscribers, I'm very grateful, obviously. Now, I remember a long time ago when I was starting and I had when I had my first 1,000 subscribers or something like that, and I would always have more views than I actually had subscribers on the video. That time has long since passed. I think it's pretty rare that one of my videos gets 8,000 views, but it's still the average views that I get are still quite high in terms of the percentage of subscribers, because then you have these channels. WotC is one of them, or rather the D&D channel that Wizards has, where they have I don't know, I think they have if I'm remembering correctly, close to 500,000 subscribers or something like that, and then they end up having 10,000 views on a video. So it's quite pathetic, actually. All right, Sad Wings Raging says, I bet Pundit is stealing his Wi-Fi from McDonald's. That's the problem. Sad Wings Raging also says, meatball or we riot. Well, it's pretty cold here still. We're in winter here. This is one of the coldest winters ever. And so meatball has largely been hiding out in warm corners somewhere, right? She's been very absent of late, except when she comes to sit on my lap, right? Because usually I've got some blanket on here, and she might show up. You never know, but she's old and cranky, so if she finds a place that she feels kind of comfortable in, she stays there. Erkki Savilainen, I hope I pronounced that right, asks, do I prefer straight pipes or curved ones? I have a curved one. I like both kinds. Most of my pipes are curved because most pipes are curved, right? This one, as you can see, this is what's called a Canadian, which is a long straight pipe with a relatively small bit compared to the shaft. And it's quite a lovely pipe. This is a Ben Wade, which are one of a great historic English brand of pipes. And then they a few years ago, they were revived as a high quality, low cost pipe. So I think this pipe was $65 when I bought it or something like that, but it smokes way above its range. When I was young, I liked buying, I've said this before, but when I was young, I liked buying really expensive pipes, right? As I guess a status thing, right? But the older I get, the more I like finding cheap pipes that, because I'm familiar with pipes, I know are going to smoke better than their ticket price. Yeah. Flint Fireforge says, my channel is not all OSR, but leans that way. I gave your Gonzo books a shout out last week. Oh, you did? What's the name of your channel, Flint? Put it on the live chat for everyone. Because and I should check to see if I'm on it, if I've subscribed to your channel. I always appreciate when people give a shout out to my books, especially my Gonzo books, which do not get as much love. Maybe it's the genre. I saw the other day that Venger Satanis is bemoaning the fact that he's basically treading water at this point, that he's not really growing anymore. And oh, Space Zeus, $10 super chat. Thank you so much. Hail Pundit, congrats on 8K. Thank you so much, Space Zeus. As usual, the live stream does not have a it's not monetized while streaming, so I greatly appreciate any and all super chats. They will of course go to help keep Meatball in supplied with tuna. Yeah, I was saying about Gonzo, like the thing is, he says, well, the pundit seems to be doing well, and I'm doing very well, but I've noticed that my Gonzo products tend to sell less than my medieval authentic stuff, right? Or some of my other stuff. So it is, you know, I write what I want to write anyways, and I suppose that that Venger ought to do the same. But really, I think the problem is that the genre he's chosen is a pretty niche genre within the realm of fantasy. So Flint Fireforge, your channel is just Flint Fireforge, is that right? See if I can find that. Let me see if I'm subscribed to it or not. Take a look here. Flint Fireforge. I am not subscribed to it. I was not aware of your channel. So there we go. So now I am going to subscribe to your channel because you gave a shout out to my Gonzo books. Thank you very much. Don Marco says pipes are not about the looks. You can feel it in the bowl, touch it, look at it, examine it. Yes, you're pretty much right about that, Don Marco. Though of course, part of it is in fact in observing the quality of the wood. You know, so that is usually a factor. The type of grain of the wood and so on. Whether there are significant imperfections in it or not, but for the most part, yes, you're right. Pat Kelly says, I have Baptism of Fire off Amazon arriving in a few days. Basically a birthday to self. Well, happy birthday, Pat, and you couldn't have picked a better present. Spirit says, how would you recommend getting players into medieval authentic when all they've known is tieflings and cat people? Well, you know, in another time, that would have seemed a lot harder to me. But in this day and age, when you have, for example, Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon it is House of the Dragon, right? I think that's what the new one is called. But anyway, it's super popular. And it is a fantasy setting, of course. It's not in the real set in the real world the way that my games are, except with magic and mythology and all of that assumed to be real. But essentially, it is that, right? Because Game of Thrones was actually based on the War of the Roses, the exact same setting, in other words, as Dark Albion. And House of the Dragon is based on the Anarchy, which was an earlier civil war that happened in England. And I've sworn one of these days I'm going to do a book, a setting book about the Anarchy. I should probably get onto that because I always tend to end up making these books when something already gets hot in pop culture, you know, like Baptism of Fire and The Witcher. And I've never even read or watched The Witcher or played the game or whatever. But there you are. It just tends to happen. But in this case, it would kind of be intentional, I suppose. So the thing is that when the way that the characters act in Game of Thrones and the behaviors are much closer in many ways to the medieval authentic style than what you see in a lot of fantasy stories where basically characters are just like people from the modern era, but in Renaissance clothing or whatever, you know. But there you see it, right? Like you see the difference between the peasants and the nobles. You see the importance of religion in the setting. You see all the class structure. You see feudalism. So they do know a lot about it now, and it ironically, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it would have been a bigger jump for people before the Game of Thrones shows showed up, you know. Jager says the problem with Gonzo is that baseline D&D is already fairly Gonzo if you buy into all the conceits, which makes more Gonzo than D&D products inherently niche. Yeah, that's a good point. Sadwings Raging, $10. Thank you so much. Congrats on 8K. Your jib cut is still the best, Pundit. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Spirit says 5e and D&D culture has gone so far away from medievalness that and the historic and mythic roots. Yeah, well, as I pointed out very often, for the last several years, every single D&D product is really just set in Seattle, and they're all dressed up in Ren Fair drag. Flint Fireforge, $8.03. 803 for 8,003 subs. Well, thank you very much, though. Technically, at least in my dashboard, it says 8,008, but I'll take it. It's fine. Thank you very much. Pundit, Don Marco asks, Pundit, how do you feel about Ravenloft, specifically Haslan? Well, I mean, I ran the original Ravenloft module. It was pretty good at the time, I thought, you know. But I've never, and I've looked over the Ravenloft setting, but I've never really played in it a lot. I think that Ravenloft, up until the 5e version of it, was a pretty interesting subgenre. It made it different from most of the other D&D settings. It had that kind of Hammer horror style that was, or you know, Victorian horror style that was moralistic, and that made it interesting because most of the rest of D&D settings are not highly moralistic. Dragonlance kind of is in a very different Mormon kind of way. I don't really know enough about Haslan to comment, I'm afraid. I don't even really remember exactly which one Haslan is. Cracks the Bold says, I mean, what you describe is just good fantasy. The same thing with magic and elves is fine. It's rare to find anything good. Well, the thing is, in a lot of modern fantasy literature, the setting might have surface level conceits of medievalism, but especially the ones written by American authors, but it happens with a lot of British authors too. But the way people act and think is like they're from the 20th or 21st centuries, right? They have these kind of modernist opinions and ideas. Jager says Baptism of Fire could be the Witcher RPG with tweaks to just 2 classes. When you read the religion history in Baptism of Fire, it shows how much Polish stuff was actually put in the Witcher books. Jeff Adamo says, almost missed it. Good thing I checked MeWe. Yeah, well, I try to publicize these. 38 people watching now. It's a little bit better. It's getting there. I don't usually do live streams on a Friday. I guess some people might be busy gaming and stuff like that, but this was the only day of the week I could manage to do it in today. Erkis Savalainen says, D&D now is basically Rifts because it wants to put everything in it, including the kitchen sink. Well, except Rifts did it in a way that was way more cool. You know, it was much more interesting than what you see in any Wizards setting. Matthew Sinan says, why are American authors not as good at this as British authors? Well, for starters, because Americans don't have a medieval history. And the British still have a stronger class structure, for example. They still have stronger elements of tradition that are looking at them, right in the face, whereas Americans don't. Jeff Adamo says Tolkien was trying to replicate myth. Modern fantasy is trying to replicate Tolkien. Yeah, and that's where the problems come in, right? Because of course, they replicate Tolkien in the at the surface level, right? The most shallow parts of it. They don't really go into the kind of depths that you see, like in Tolkien's setting. There is obviously a very strong element of kind of what Anglo-Saxon culture was like in the pre-medieval era, right? In the kind of a dark age culture. And most of the settings miss that part. They get the elves and the dwarves and the wizard with the staff and the balrogs and things like that, but they don't really get the world building that Tolkien was able to do. Spirit says they're not well read in the myths is the problem. Correct. Cal Vanoni, congratulations. Thank you, Cal. Jeff Adamo says it's bizarre how many people try to play Norse pagan while being clearly completely ignorant about the very basics of their myth and culture. Glenn Fireforge asks, do you read any modern fantasy novels? Any recommendations? No, I don't. Basically, I don't read novels, and I haven't read a novel in a very long time. I spend my time reading history, reading historical sources, reading mythology, reading ancient mystical texts, and various other things, nonfiction. But to me, you'd have to blow my mind with something for me to bother looking at any other novels, because the problem is novels are very they're quite generic and quite forgettable as far as I'm concerned. Well, we're up to 41 watching now. That's pretty good. And we're getting close to 17 minutes of running time here, according to YouTube. Now, I did read a lot of novels, obviously, when I was a kid, in my teens, somewhat into my 20s. Read comic books. Been a long while since I've read a comic book too, though. So, but that's mostly because they all started to suck. Right. So I'm thinking about where I want to start. And I guess I could start by telling you guys a bit of what I'm getting up to here. David Hogenegger says, hello from Europe and congratulations. Thank you so much. Okay, Salainen says, what's that symbol on your ring? It is a square and compass. Matthew Sinance says, I've claimed British were better than Americans in some aspects. Well, I mean, obviously, when you're talking about fantasy, Tolkien, who was British, is one of the great standards, let's say. And then you you also have oh, Jesus Christ, what's his name? How could I have forgotten this? The guy that wrote Elric. You guys know who I'm talking about. This is my Joe Biden imitation. Anyway, Michael Moorcock. There we go. I think that Moorcock is a very British kind of author, and he's quite good. I do not mean Neil Gaiman. I've never been especially impressed by anything Neil Gaiman has written. However, in comic books, you have Alan Moore, and you have the guy that wrote The Invisibles. His arch rival in the Magic Wars, whose name also escapes me right now. But the other wizard, the other DC Comics wizard, and both of those guys are British. Grant Morrison, yes, thank you. Now they're not fantasy authors as such, but there you are. Obviously, there are very good American fantasy authors as well. He wasn't one of my favorites as such, but the creator of Conan definitely made a very strong impression on pulp fantasy. H.P. Lovecraft, obviously. Fritz Leiber, Lankmar is fantastic. And he was American, even though he doesn't sound that American by last name, but there you go. And of course, Roger Zelazny. Very good point, Judd. How could I have forgotten him? But America, on the other hand, has like thousands of really crappy B-grade fantasy novels. Space Zoo says Abby the Bulldog is intently watching the screen, waiting for Meatball so she can bark at her. She recognizes your voice. I don't know. Like I was saying earlier, I don't know if Meatball is going to show up or not tonight, but I hope she decides to make an appearance at some point, because I know you guys are all waiting for her. Yes, Clark Ashton Smith. Yeah. Yeah. See, I wouldn't say David Eddings comes up to the same level. And of course, in some ways, the better American authors are the ones that draw from inspiration of. I mean, I guess this is true in any case, of history or literature from Europe, right? Because that's one of the big problems, right? There's that if you're an American and you're doing American fantasy, the tendency is to do, like, technically a lot of them are a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, right? It's like, yes, it's got all the medieval trappings, but the people all act like Americans, and Americans do not act like old world Europeans. All right, so stuff that I'm working on. Obviously, we are continuing with the Pundit Files, and I guess you guys might like to know what some of the next issues coming up are. So the current issue of the Pundit Files, which is available in the Red Room, the Red Room store. You can check it out in the description of this very live stream. One thing I did get ahead on is I've put all the links to all my products in the description of this live stream. And over at the Red Room store, I have my whole collection of the Pundit Files. There are currently 18 issues. The latest one is The Great Firebird Hunt, which is an adventure for baptism of fire. There we are. So The Great Firebird Hunt is it's a sandbox style adventure that has to do with a magical creature, a magical bird that has been spotted in the woods near a border town, whose magic feathers are incredibly valuable. And there is a rush of would-be bird hunters in the area, so the player characters have to manage the problems of rivals and competitors. They have to find their way through the forest, which has its own set of mysteries and dangers, and try to catch this bird before anybody else gets it. And it's a fun little adventure. It's something that comes out of my campaign. And that is the current issue of the Pundit Files. The next issue, coming out next week, I believe, is Random Space Opera Worlds, which is designed to be quite generic. So like you can use it for any science fiction OSR game, but it is obviously a supplement for Star Adventurer, and it gives the first tiniest hints of the Star Adventurer setting that I've been trying to work on for a long time now. It's a lot easier for me to make settings based on history, obviously. And so making a sci-fi setting is more complicated for me. But having done this one source book, because I decided, okay, well, one thing that would be cool would be to make a set of generators that would allow player characters in a kind of open sandbox style space opera game be able to travel from area to area, sector to sector, and find weird planets. But you know, there have been a lot of those before, so I decided, well, I might as well do this in the context of the campaign I have in mind, which is like for a long time now, in my own head at least, I've been calling this campaign the Sons of Heaven, and it's essentially set very, very distantly into the future, in a future where humanity very long ago had been conquered by an alien race who had used humans because of certain particularities of human brains as navigators for their starships. Eventually, the humans escaped from that captivity, and they started to develop their own large and very successful confederation in space. But then there was a devastating galactic war, and the setting itself takes place about 200 years after that galactic war, where the human confederation is completely shattered, and the player characters can be either, you know, adventurers out to try their luck, looking over these worlds, some of which have slipped back into savagery or, you know, collapse, some of which have been wiped out or conquered, and some of which are still struggling along in much smaller polities of different kinds, to try to make, you know, the player characters can be there out to try to make their fortune, or they can be one of several kind of groups or movements that are looking to try to once again reunify the human confederation, or to make a replacement for it, to bring humanity back to a position of its former glory. So it's a generator, but it's a generator that puts in all of those setting conceits. Jeff Adamo says George R. R. Martin feels genuinely medieval, but doesn't feel like myth in the least. That's true, but that's because it's not a myth. George R. R. Martin is doing a chronicle, so he is writing the story of something that is not legendary, but is an account of what happened in real life. You know, his Game of Thrones reads like Shakespeare's Hollow Crown saga, right? It's like in Shakespeare's story of the War of the Roses, it doesn't seem like myth at all. It's like it's a story of deeply flawed people doing deeply flawed things, right? Which is also still very much medieval, you know. So there we are. Flint Fireford says, thoughts on Brandon Sanderson getting into the RPG game with Cosmere? Well, I'm sorry to say that I've never read anything of Brandon Sanderson's, and I'm not really familiar with what his game is about. So I guess it hasn't really gotten very much on my radar. Jeff Adamo says, I wouldn't want to tackle space opera. It seems hard. I've heard space is pretty big. Well, it is pretty big, but that doesn't mean that it has to be that the player characters have to, or that the campaign has to be very big, right? You could do a campaign in just a certain limited area of space. Or on the other hand, you could do one where your characters are, you know, jumping from one place to another. Ironically, the what I've discovered is that when you have a very large setting, like a gigantic setting, then you can either just hyper focus into one part of that setting, or what you can do is just not worry about the spaces where your characters aren't at, but develop the places that they go to and gradually increase places that they go to. And in fact, it's not a space setting as such, but my World of the Last Sun is that way because it's a gigantic setting, because it's inside of a Dyson sphere. Not to mention it also has like multiple dimensions and, you know, other areas, like, you know, what's on the outside, or rather in the core, or rather the subsurface environment of the Dyson sphere, right? And all of that sort of thing. So you know, even after playing that campaign for 11 years, the player characters have like barely been to, yeah, they've been to less than 10% of it probably, you know. So what that means is, as a DM, you can throw in anything if you want to, right? Especially if you don't like just try to give away the whole game to them, you know, and from the start. And that's why my Last Sun books aren't like, okay, here's the whole world map. No, here are specific areas that have existed in the campaign already, and it'll give you ideas for other areas you can invent or put into. So after Random Space Opera Worlds, the next product that'll be coming out in the Pundit Files is called Talismans and Djinn Magic, which is obviously meant to be for Sword and Caravan. It adds some new magical systems in it that you could also use, because it's ritual magic and all that, because all of my, you know, magic in the Lion and Dragon, Baptism of Fire, etc., is ritual magic. You could easily bring this into any other game, right? Especially any other game that has a, you know, Arabian Adventures kind of setting to it. So it shows you how the real idea behind how in the Middle Eastern regions of the Silk Road, magicians created magical charms and talismans, and also what they really thought about how the djinn worked and what you had to do if you wanted to try to communicate with, bind, or trap a djinn, which is really dangerous. Like it's crazy dangerous, but you know, I could just see my characters in Sword and Caravan wanting to do that at some point. Well, then the next one after that is going to be number 21, I guess, is the medieval calendar year, which is going to be more a source book for DMs who want to add more authenticity to their campaign. It's a very detailed guideline to how an entire year worked in the European medieval world, right? So what were people doing at every month, the major religious celebrations and what they looked like at the time. So like, for example, Christmas in the Middle Ages is totally different than what we think of as Christmas today. It was not for kids. Let's put it that way. It was not a family affair. And then some of these, this includes some of these religious rituals that I would guess probably a lot of even devout Catholics today would never have heard of, right? So like, I don't know how many Catholics out there would know when and what Rogation Day is, right? But it was a major religious festival in the Middle Ages. So, this gives you details and obviously adventure cues for different times of the year, like what would your characters be doing if they were adventurers at different times of the year, and all kinds of things like that. So that's what's going on with the Pundit Files right now. As far as other stuff, I have just started work, and it's going to take some time to complete, on a product, a larger source book, not a Pundit Files, but an actual supplement for Baptism of Fire that is going to be called 101 Sarmatians, Aristocratic Intrigues for Baptism of Fire. It's going to have more information on the Slacha, the Polish aristocracy. And then it's going to present more information about the specific clans that were around in the time of the Baptism of Fire campaign, and have sample people, members of those clans that would be active during the time of the campaign, that can introduce plot hooks. They can be patrons. There'll probably be some new mechanics in there, and obviously random tables and things like that. It's still going to take quite a while to get done, but I think you're going to find it pretty useful if you're running a Baptism of Fire campaign, especially if you're running one where you want to involve, the ruling classes, as it were. Exnard Prime says, what have you published that's a comprehensive bibliography of your historical research? I've never really written a bibliography of my historical research. My historical research has spanned 20 years of, 30 years now, I guess, of academic study. And it goes, if you're asking what do I research for my books, it's everything from stuff I've known since I was in, an undergrad in university, all the way to stuff I've discovered very recently and online, everything from seriously academic books to online resources, and everything in between. So I'm afraid I don't really have citations for you. I'm not sure how useful they would be either, because it's the problem isn't what to read, it's how to find what you need to find and know the difference between something that is a credible source versus a non-credible source. It's actually the skills of a historian that you need, not a specific list of books. That's where people tend to get it wrong, right? Is that you need to learn how to research. That's the trick, and unfortunately, that's not something that I can teach you. Undead Fred said, I did a year of following the days of the liturgy a long time ago. It's interesting. Be prepared to just not eat meat for over a third of the year. Yeah, that's right. I mean, there was the two major periods, the Lenten and the Advent period, for starters. Never mind that every Friday also, you were not supposed to eat meat. Jestro Games, Pundit, congratulations on 8,000. Thank you so much. So that is the other thing I'm working on right now. There is one other thing that is going on, and it appears to be going forward, though I can't give you any kind of timeline or pace to it at the moment. But there is a publisher that is very interested and as I said, is apparently continuing ahead with this project of creating a new compound omnibus volume of Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion, which will have some updated material in it. It'll mostly be the original material, but some of it is going to be added or changed. Some of the stuff in Lion and Dragon will be expanded with stuff from Pundit Presents in a similar way to how Baptism of Fire is. So it's basically going to be a new edition, you could say, of Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion. I think that'll be very interesting. It's good for me because it's not that much work for me. I am probably going to have to do some work, making a few changes and supervising the work of what this publisher wants to do. But it's pretty cool, you know. Judd says have to drop out. See you later, Judd. Yeah, I think based on what I've seen of this publisher, if they can carry through, then I think that they're going to produce good stuff. They've done good stuff before, and they seem very serious about it. So I think it'll work out pretty well. Jester says, Pundit, let's say I want to mix Lion and Dragon Star Adventure. Should I just use World of the Last Sun? I wouldn't use World of the Last Sun for that because it's really a whole different thing, right? Neither Lion and Dragon nor Star Adventure are Gonzo, right? They are both very much non-Gonzo. I think that probably if I was going to try, like, let's say you wanted to do, I don't know, something like the War of the Roses in space, or, you know, Knights in space, then I would probably use, for the most part, Star Adventure as the basis for it. If you wanted to have like magicians in space, you could add the Magister and stuff like that from Lion and Dragon into it, and the magic system. There's no reason not that wouldn't work. And I would work on combining those two, I guess, you know, like if that it would require a bit of fixing in a couple of areas, but I think that would be the way to do it. The setting I am having in mind for Star Adventure Sons of Heaven is something that I would more closely describe as the Bronze Age collapse in space. So it's not going to be quite what you're looking for, but it might be a little bit up your alley. I'm sure you'll be able to find some things that will be useful for it. The Dark Mist says, congratulations, Pundit. This is your player, once Edmund, now El Sakri. I've just run my first Baptism of Fire D&D game, and it went really well. I'm very glad to hear that. I really appreciate it. Xnard Prime says, I find it seems to me genuous. I think you meant to say ingenuous, maybe. Carrying your words authentic medieval or historical medieval Poland, even though I like your word, just because you say medieval authentic can't mean you personally have an eyewitness time machine to medieval Europe. Well, nobody has an eyewitness time machine to medieval Europe, but historians have the benefit of being able to look at primary sources, as well as other stuff, archaeological materials, chronicles, later historical analysis, etc. And there's been a tremendous amount of scholarship on cultural history of Europe. You know, obviously there's more of it in English, at least, of England than there is of Poland, but there's a decent amount when it comes to Poland as well. So when I say medieval authentic, I mean that the setting fits with the medieval paradigm as medieval people understood it, based on the things that they had written and accounted and the details that are in these chronicles. And and the history that we have. I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible that none of that history is real, right? Maybe I don't know, the Illuminati invented this make-believe history, and actually, you know, the world started sometime around, you know, I don't know, 1820, and everything before that is just something that was invented by the Anunnaki or whatever. But if you're going to go into that kind of mentality, then you can't believe anything, right? Instead, I will choose to believe the sources that I have examined. You know, not that there aren't debates about some of those sources at different times, and then you have to kind of choose for yourself what you think is the more likely perspective, one that's more likely to be accurate. Um, Undead Fred says, I was always captivated by the struggle against the Mongols in the East. I imagine the Eastern Church was more. If the Eastern Church was more significant in our culture, it would replace Crusaders as the common medical image. Here's the thing is that the Eastern Church kind of got its ass kicked by the Mongols, didn't it? I mean, that's a lot of the reason why the Russians are as messed up as they are in our modern world is because the actual Russian civilization, the Volga Rus, the Kiev Rus, Novgorod, all of those were wiped out by the Mongols, you know, and that's the same reason why, for example, there's a lot of things messed up about Chinese culture and about Middle Eastern culture. It was the Mongols. The Mongols, they psychologically devastated, never mind the physical devastation of everywhere that they went through, because these all had societies that were developing, that had confidence, that were innovative. And in all the cases I mentioned, after the Mongols wipe everything out, all of them eventually rebuild, but they rebuild in a form that is backwards facing, and that is trying to recover what they had lost, this lost past that they've never gotten over, you know. And that is what causes a lot of the subsequent decline of those civilizations versus the Western European civilization, which, not having been conquered by the Mongols, ends up becoming the more dynamic and innovative civilization at that point. Because before that, Western Europe was a backwater compared to any of the three I mentioned, you know. Rushrock said, have you read The Faithful Executioner, a book about the accounts of a real Nuremberg medieval headsman? Very insightful into that time period. I know the reference that you're talking about, but I've never read it. Gody Fornox says, can you tell us more about your demon summonings, their purpose? I'm assuming you mean in Lion and Dragon and in Baptism of Fire. The summoning and binding of demons was one of the chief activities of medieval magicians, where they called upon the power of God to essentially obligate demons to perform some kind of a service. Cody Foran says, no, I mean in real life. Well, same thing, basically. Let's say it that way. Matthew Sinan says, okay, now this is an interesting question because we're getting to the main topic of the night. What do you think Wizards of the Coast needs to do before their reputation is repaired? I suspect that their reputation is beyond repair at this point. And I think that the people that they have there now are people that are no longer capable or competent enough to be able to repair it. They've got almost everybody who is in a position of influence there now is either someone who is not actually familiar in any meaningful way with the RPG hobby, or someone who is extremely mediocre, a midwits at best. I've seen on the RPG site someone posted a thread mentioning that in the new player's handbook, apparently they have Jeremy Crawford taking the claim as the lead designer of D&D 5th edition, and Mike Merles being how do you call it, posthumously eliminated from the historical record in the finest Stalinist style, which is really, really funny, right? Because if you know the history of those two, Mike Merles was basically Simon, and Jeremy Crawford was at best Garfunkel, right? He was just the guy who played the guitar on the lyrics that Mike Merles wrote. And I don't know. I guess in that analogy, I was the Bob Dylan albums that Simon listened to while he came up with his lyrics, something like that. But it's and that's the guy now that is the closest thing that they even have to someone who is knowledgeable about the hobby. And tonight I'm going to tell you guys a few things that one of my insiders has been telling me about what's recent stuff that's been going on. Jaeger says, yes, WotC have self-selected for their political opinions first, design abilities second. I'm not saying that's not true. It is absolutely true, but that's not even the major problem. The thing is, WotC, fundamentally, this is the problem. Dungeons and Dragons does not make enough money and cannot make enough money as the hobby that it is to be satisfactory to Hasbro. That's not to say it doesn't make money. It does make money. And if you had a small company, if you had a company of 20 employees or whatever, and you were the creator of D&D or you were the publisher of D&D, you would probably be super happy with the amount of money that D&D made. But Hasbro is a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company, and for them, it's not money that is significant enough for them. And we know this. We know this because we know exactly what it is that Hasbro expects of D&D, because when Cynthia Williams became CEO, she said as much. She said, Dungeons and Dragons, I will turn Dungeons and Dragons into a $1 billion product. That's what they want it to be. And there's no way they're going to make that from the standard model of what an RPG hobby looks like, right? Which is why they're putting aside, even if they had no woke politics at all, the real thing is that they understand that there is no way they're going to make the money that they want with the hobby that they have. So what they have to do is change D&D into something other than that hobby, which is why they are going all in on the virtual tabletop. Because the virtual tabletop, they believe, and based on things like, the Magic Online stuff and Monopoly Go and stuff like that, this is what they think is going to monetize D&D to a level that is satisfactory to them. So the real issue is that above Jeremy Crawford's level, when you get into like the CEOs, because Jeremy Crawford is not one of them, you've got a whole bunch of people there that have nothing to do with the hobby, and they have everything to do with a corporate history of online gaming of different kinds and monetization and microtransactions and all of that sort of thing, because that is what they actually want. And this is why they're basically giving up on the books. They really are. You know, like there's going to be, I'm not saying there's never going to be another book after these three, but I am saying that books will become a rare and special thing that will be used only kind of as these collectibles or merchandising activities that are going to be, they're going to be specialty items. They're not going to, it's not going to be a publishing business. It's going to be a business of merchandising. And so just like you might get a Beholder plushie for sale, you might get a box set of something, right? Of, you know, like the Deck of Many Things one that came out not too long ago. That was a luxury item. That was a specialty item. That wasn't a standard publishing product. So that is the fundamental issue. Jeff Adamo says, I run a local Discord full of lefties. Just today, they were excited about pre-ordering the new books. Good grief. Well, I mean, that might be a success for some of them, except that I kind of still suspect that the virtual tabletop is in some ways going to be way less woke than the last several years of D&D books were, because it's very easy to infuse wokeness into a book. But when you're doing a virtual tabletop, you know, it has to be about, you're not going to have a virtual tabletop. Maybe I'm wrong, right? I mean, never take my advice on anything to do with technology, right? But my mental image of what that virtual tabletop is going to be like is that it's going to be about a lot of dungeons, wilderness adventuring, ruins, etc. It seems very unlikely to me that they're going to come out with some kind of major virtual tabletop product where you're running a Starbucks in a fantasy college of wizards, where your life is a hot mess and there's going to be romantic subplots, you know. Like, I strongly suspect that's not the way they're going to go. Because, right, it's not, that is, like, I'm not saying that there's not going to be any, like, that you're not going to get, I don't know, some NPC that gives you some token LGBT representation or something like that, right? But the thing is that these last few years, WotC's publishing branch was putting out products that were essentially entirely subversive of the entire paradigm. And I don't think they can do that with the VTT and make money. And I think even they know that, right? Like, I think they cannot be that stupid as to think that that's when they're going to come out and people are going to want it, you know? Jeff Adamo says they're banking on compulsively consuming autistics. Yeah, the completists. Yeah, that is. I mean, I have no doubt that they're still going to sell an important amount of the new 3 core books. I'm not sure if that'll be anywhere close to what the original 5e core books did, but I'm sure it'll be a pretty good amount. But the problem is that after that, it'll vanish, right? Because after they're not interested in selling more books after that. They're interested in using the books as a gateway to the virtual tabletop. Steambub says, thoughts on the basic experts post on the OSR being cringe? Well, I think the basic expert is kind of cringe. And if he says he doesn't want to be OSR anymore, well, bye. You know, like, the OSR has been growing steadily for the last 5 years. I did a video about it. I presented where the proof was. The OSR is only getting bigger and more successful as time goes by. So the fact that he doesn't want to be in it anymore, well, that's something that only he could explain. Undead Fred says, I mean, I get it. I remember being 13 and being excited when 3.5 released. Can't fault the kids for being excited for falling for the marketing. Yeah, well, you know, it's a classic. This is part of the problem of new edition cycling, right? That and D&D totally fell into that, right? Where you release a core book, and that's obviously going to give a big boost to your sales. And so in the short term, that's highly beneficial. But unless that core book is somehow vastly better than the previous one, it also means you're going to lose a significant percentage of people along the way. There are going to be a large number of people who bought the previous edition that will not buy the new one. And that means that you're actually exchanging a short-term boost for long-term losses. People don't really get that. And that's part of why when Merles was designing 5e, one of the things that was one of the goals was for it to be an evergreen edition. And it did pretty well for that for a very long time, because I mean, it was 10 years. That's a longer run than any of the other WotC editions ever managed, right? And I certainly don't expect the current one to manage that. Or the new one, I mean. Rushok says the real problem with their online model is the nickel and diming of content, like $4.99 for a turtle race, $9.99 for a ranger subclass. Well, that'll depend on these experts on microtransactions. I'm not an expert on any of these things, but I have read a little bit about this sort of stuff. And for example, online Android games that are monetized, apparently 99% of the people who play these games that are like free, but you pay for extras or you pay for special stuff, 99% of people never pay for anything in the game. So the secret to doing well with microtransactions is tapping that 1%. But that 1%, if you have enough players playing the game, can be enormous, right? That can be like huge, right? Stuff like Candy Crush, the people behind it made an absolute fortune because you had like 1 billion people playing, but you know, a mere 100 million were willing to spend cash, and the ones that are willing to spend cash are going to be regularly spending cash on it. So, you know, there you are. If you add to that a kind of low price subscription model, that probably also increases the benefits. Anyways, I guess I should get to like the stuff that I have received, the secret stuff that I have received here. But before I do, I will mention again to everyone, if you can, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed. This live stream is to celebrate the fact that I now have over 8,000 subscribers. If you happen to not be one of them, this is the moment to join up, you know, for sure. And hit the like button if you can to promote the video and to share details about the channel. If you know, this live stream is not being presently monetized, so if any of you want to put in a super chat to keep Meatball in tuna, then please feel free to do so. I'll be very grateful. All right, and now on to the first topic. So all of you guys are probably familiar at this point that at Gen Con, there was a group of people who were presented as you know, being VIPs in a way of Wizards of the Coast. Most of them were kind of known D&D influencers. They were given the advanced copies of the player's handbook, and were given kind of a guide of how they should be shilling it, you know. And since then, there's been a lot of controversy about it, because there's been some channels that Wizards of the Coast has gone after because they felt that they weren't shilling the products the right way. They didn't like what they were saying about it, you know. And then on the other hand, you have other people who were allegedly being paid off in certain ways to shill about it. You know, I have seen people saying, I've seen some people who are either, depending on whether you believe them or not, they're either very principled or not, or very unprincipled, that have said that they were directly offered bribes to claim that the player's handbook, the new player's handbook, was amazing, you know, to basically shill the hell out of it. And some people said no, obviously, and then decided to blow the whistle on them, even though it meant that they were probably never, ever going to get anything from Wizards again, you know. And we can therefore, if we believe those people, we can therefore presume that they're some of the people who are shilling the new PHB in a completely propagandistic sort of way are being paid off to do it. You know? Now, the person that has sent me this wants to stay anonymous for obvious reasons. And what they said is that at the event where these people were given these press packs and these PHBs, the people that were in charge of handing out the corporate propaganda had made a big emphasis on telling everybody they gave the books to that they are fully committed to table play, whatever that means. It's meant to give you the impression that that means that they are that they're dedicated and that Wizards intends to continue being dedicated to people playing D&D outside of the virtual tabletop. But the perception that they had, that this person had, even at that event, was that this was very clearly not so much some kind of statement of truth as it was that they wanted very much for the 5e YouTubers to repeat this idea in order to try to protect the engagement of the current fandom. They want people to buy the books under the promise that nothing's going to change for them, even though it's almost certainly going to be a bait and switch, you know. And that, you know, since then, when you see that the legal team of WotC has struck down certain YouTubers who they didn't care for, and then you know, forced the blurring out of images from the PHB and other channels. This is all kind of a big bait and switch. So, you know, they are trying to continue to get people to buy in on the new books under this promise that they will be able to keep playing in the tabletop, and then what they're going to say is, well, yeah, you've got 3 core books, you know, there you go. What else do you need? That doesn't mean that they're going to continue to publish, because I've had some people trying to claim, oh, that the pundit is wrong about this because you know, these guys are definitely going to make new products. But again, they haven't announced any new book products after the 3 core books and this one kind of art book that's coming out as part that was always going to come out as part of the 50th anniversary celebration, so much as it was. So it's pretty clear that what they're worried about is people not buying the core books when they come out, because they realize that these core books are not really going to get a lot of support after that, and they're doing everything they can to try to propagandize that somehow this is actually still going to be happening, you know. So this is the first bit of dirt that I've been sent. There's more. I just want to check here on the comments from people. Undead Fred says, WotC said the same thing. 80% of the books are bought by 15% of the audience, aka DMs. Yeah, the difference is that is a much smaller audience, right? What they're really hoping for, and I'm not saying that they're going to succeed in this, because I mean, like, historically, Wizards has never been good at succeeding at making VTTs, but what they're expecting is that they're going to have, you know, millions and millions of people in the VTT, and out of those, you know, a tiny percentage will be the ones that'll put in the, you know, 90% of the monetization of the VTT. But that's how mobile games work always, you know. Xnard Prime says, people from Poland or a substantial amount of Polish heritage people reviewed Baptism of Fire or said much. There has been a Polish review of Baptism of Fire, which appears to be quite positive. And I've had several, this is something I was worried about, obviously, because I am of part Polish background, and I'm a historian, but I'm not someone who was raised directly in Poland, for starters, nor was I raised in a entirely Polish culture. Obviously, there are some elements of Polish culture that are part of my background, but I am not, I'm not even a competent speaker in Polish, right? So, just like whenever I make one of these, I've never had someone from the area around Samarkand review Sword and Caravan, unfortunately, right? I have had a couple of people of Indian background who have looked at Arrows of Indra and were quite pleased with it, right? Because they thought it was very respectful and a very positive take and very true to kind of the Indian epic myths. So I was really happy about that. Obviously, a lot of English people who are good fans of Albion and of Lion and Dragon, but that's a little bit easier for me because, if anything, my culture is I've half of the culture, at least I've grown up in, was Anglo culture, right? And I've lived in England and everything else. But in the case of Baptism of Fire, I've had comments from several Polish people living in Poland, who have lived in Poland their whole lives, who have said that they really like the game, who are Polish gamers. In fact, I was especially pleased that there was a guy who got in touch with me when Baptism of Fire came out. He said he thought it was really great and all of this, and then later when I did one of the Pundit Files products, again, all of which are at the Red Room, all of which cost $3.50. So if you can get someone to give you $3.50, you can buy one of these products, including the one I'm about to mention, the Medieval City Guide to Poznan. When he found out about that, he was especially pleased because him and his gaming group live in Poznan, right? And he said, I did a very good job on that, right? And so, there are places I mention in the book that are obviously still there that they've literally seen with their own eyes, right? So, and they were they thought it was a fantastic product. So, I have had some very good feedback from Polish gamers, and I wasn't sure if I was going to or not. I thought, they might find some of it off, or they might find some of it old-fashioned or whatever, right? But they were quite pleased. So I was very pleased. Odomanjir says, I think a couple of drive-through reviews were polls, maybe. Yeah, I think there was at least one or two. Yeah. Eric Savalainen says, why are you wearing a scarf? Isn't it hot? No, it isn't. It's winter where I am right now. Undead Fred says, I went to Poland with some Marine buddies. Everywhere you go in Europe, the people speak English but barely tolerate Americans. Poland loves Americans, but nobody speaks English. No one of consequence says, I was stationed alongside the Polish army in Afghanistan for a while. They are great people. All right. Got rid of someone who is. Well, it's really funny. I don't know why this has started happening now, right? It's not like my live streams are more popular than they used to be or something, but it never used to happen. It used to be once in a while you'd get some guy that I banned from the RPG site or something, and he would come on and call me an asshole or something like that. But now you get like these guys, and I'm like, I wonder if every live stream gets these people that are just like professional live stream trolls that will come onto the live chat and they'll just say nonsense. That's all they'll say, right? Like they'll just say stuff that has no relevance at all to anything as like a way to spam the chat, but they're not like trying to sell you something, or they're just being weird. It's really unusual. I'm not sure what that's about. But all right, whatever. Oh, Undead Fred, $10 super chat. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I backed Shadowdark Kickstarter, have the book. I like it. Well written, good book binding, zero complaints. But why are we acting like AD&D with 5e rule sensibility logic is something revolutionary? Well, you know, that has kind of been my complaint of some of the fans of this. And of course, some of Shadowdark's fans might incorrectly believe that it is revolutionary because they have no idea about the OSR. But others come from the OSR and act as if it's something revolutionary. And the only thing I can say is that I guess some of them perhaps have never looked very much past like the clone products like OSC or Labyrinth Lord. Because if not, they know that there's like dozens and dozens and dozens of OSR games that are not just clones and that do have very revolutionary rules, and that in fact almost none of the revolutionary rules in Shadowdark are unique to Shadowdark. That they've shown up in multiple other places, but there we are. No one of consequence says. The only thing I remember about the Polish soldiers is they would steal loaves of bread from the mess tent and dig it back to their living area to make alcohol. Hammerhead Starcraft says Kelsey is probably the best adventure writer in 5e, so she has some fans there. Yeah, well, again, you can't blame those fans if they come out of 5e, which is where Kelsey comes out of in terms of her designing, for not realizing that the rest of the OSR exists. You know. So Scott says, David Bowie said, never be the first person to do anything, always be the second. Shadowdark is the second. Well, except Shadowdark isn't the second. Shadowdark is like the seventh to do something, you know, because, for example, my Lion and Dragon, which when it came out was quite innovative in its time for the OSR at that moment around, you know, 2015. It started in my Dark Albion campaign as Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which was an extremely radical product in around 2009. You know, so there's this history of innovation that keeps developing and developing in the OSR. The point is, I mean, Shadowdark is very well produced. It was very well promoted. The author is a woman, which, whether you like it or not, does have a certain effect, because obviously there are very few women in the OSR, and so that is going to be a bit of a draw. By all accounts, the art and production is very good. The rules are solid, right? So there's a lot of good reasons why Shadowdark has done so well. Scott says, what makes a TTRPG radical in your opinion? Well, in the context of the conversation we're having right now, what I mean is that there are people who still make clones to this day, which I really just, I don't even understand it. Like how many versions of Basic Expert do we need, right? Like how many of BX? And then there's people, but then there's a lot of people who also make a product that is pretty much a clone with one or two added little details, right? So like this is basic expert, but I've expanded the rules of about armor or something like that, you know, like and so that isn't particularly radical either. But then you have, when you have people that usually I think is that you come up with either a genre, say like, I don't know, cyberpunk or, let's say Hammer Horror as an RPG, or a setting, right? A specific setting. So I don't know, the shogunate in Japan, right? A setting that is based on that. And you redirect the OSR rules to fit what you want that genre to reflect or that setting to reflect. That's where you end up getting people coming up with some particularly interesting and clever ideas. And so I think that is the cutting edge of the OSR, is where people come up with these interesting new mechanics that all have to be able to look like they could have been created in the old school period, right? They can't be something that goes out to lunch in like Story Gamer land or that look like some kind of crunchy nonsense from the late 90s, right? They have to fit stylistically with the OSR design ethic. And if you do those, if you do that successfully, then it really works. And of course, at this point, there's now a whole set of tools of rule modifications that do that, right? DCC introduced a bunch of them. Lamentations introduced a couple of them, and subsequent people have been introducing more of them. I've introduced some of them, right? I've also borrowed some of the old ones and made newer versions of them. And this is all part of how the OSR works, right? So like my magic system with its emphasis on ritual magic is an innovation, but the core of the mechanic of how that magic works is very clearly inspired by Dungeon Crawl Classics, you know. So this is where you see people keep developing newer, interesting things, right? And then you have stuff like the Red Room with their morality, the aspects of their moral vices becoming a significant part of play, which also inspired me to do something similar with one of the optional rules in Baptism of Fire of Legend and Infamy, you know. So that leads to some very interesting areas of new developments in the OSR. Cody Fornock says the name Shadowdark is the same kind of bland that plagues fantasy gaming these days. Yeah, I've got to say, Shadowdark sounds so like 4th edition D&D, doesn't it? I mean, that is one thing I would criticize, but then again, it's been tremendously successful. So, you know, the proof is in the pudding. Undead Fred says crunchy nonsense. Me and my Warhammer fantasy know when we're not wanted, good sir. Well, I've always thought that Warhammer is not nearly as crunchy as some of the other stuff. David Hohenegger says, are there any OSR adventure resources that are innovative in presentation? Well, yeah, I'd say there's quite a few, actually. And like some of them are just really good takes on classic elements. So like, you know, when you have the barrow maze, that is the ultimate, to me, like it's pretty much the ultimate version of the classic D&D dungeon, but done in an incredibly good way. And then you have other stuff like in my OSR Old School Companion 2, I have a whole set of mostly investigative medieval adventures that are all sandbox style adventures. That's one of the things that OSR adventuring does often pretty well, which is like the sandbox adventure as opposed to the railroad adventure. You know, so there are several people who are very good at that. You know, obviously Lamentations is one of them too. So there's a lot of good adventure resources that are available in the OSR. All right, so let me see what else I had for you guys to tell you about. Right. See if I can get a better view of this. Oh, here we go. That I knew I had a better version of this. There we go. All right. So if you check out the credits page of the new player's handbook, you end up seeing that there is an enormous amount of people that were involved. And apparently, I'm not an expert on this, right? But this is what my my how do you call it, confidential informant has told me. You have a very significant number of people that are in the credits, including the illustrators and the people who are credited as consultants that have ties to Sweet Baby Inc. And there's some people that think that this is part of the reason why YouTube has forced Wizards rather has forced YouTubers to blur out the credits page when they've been putting it up. So to me, of course, I'm not an expert on this subject. Some of you are probably much more expert on the subject of Sweet Baby Inc. than I am. But it's hilarious when you see the list of consultants that they have there. Because I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a list of consultants for 5th edition, right? The original list of consultants that included myself and Zach Smith, as we all know, and that was eventually removed on account of the supposed the alleged misdeeds of Zach Smith. And the additional consultants listed there, besides the two of us, which are the ones that get mentioned the most, were also all people who had very serious chops in game design. So myself and Zach Smith, Jeff Grubb, Kenneth Height, Kevin Culp, Robin Laws, the inimitable S. John Ross, and Vincent Venturella. Right? These are all people who were at the top of their game in 2014. Technically, I wasn't yet at the top of my game. I was in some ways the greenest of the lot there, right? But we were all people that were very well known for our creativity in design and concepts of gaming. Okay. If you look at the list of consultants that they have in the new one, it's Sarah Benjamin, Bashir Gozi, Kaylee Jones, James Mendez, Brian Powers, Pam Punzalan, Jason Schickler, I think, Kyle Brink, the guy that said, you know, white men can't leave D&D soon enough, Aaron Forsyth, Mark Hagen, Jay Janney, Chris Mooney, James Rose, Carl Sibley, and Katie Stutzman. Not one of these people is known for game design chops in any way, right? Like they're like Kyle Brink is literally a corporate suit guy, right? And then the rest of these are people that I've barely even heard of. So like these are the people that they've had as consultants. Chelsea, obviously, game design is not something that they're interested in getting consultation on. None of these people are involved in that. And I'm guessing that quite a few of these people are either on the corporate marketing side of things, or some of them perhaps on the microtransactions and BTT side of things. And then some of them are probably Sweet Baby Inc. people or something like that. They're DEI consultants, right? So this is another very big difference between the previous and the current people that were consulting on the most successful edition of D&D that WotC ever had versus this pile of crap. I don't know if any of you are familiar with a single name there other than Kyle Brink. If you are, feel free to let me know who those people are. Undead Fred says, the real tragedy is being included on a credit list and not using a pseudonym like Ben DeWang. Ben DeWang. Excellent. Harry Balls. Those days are over. Harry Balls would have been canceled, I'm sure. So then, you know, again, the illustrators, like, they're all Tumblr artists, pretty much, I think. And so, like, you know, this is just trash, really. And it's and again, in the credits, it says there, based on the Player's Handbook 2014, designed by Jeremy Crawford, lead, and then Bruce Cordell, Tom LaPile, Peter Lee, Mike Merles. He is listed 5th when he was in fact the overall lead designer of the 2014 edition. So this is an unpersoning of very significant scale. It also does end up saying, building on the original game created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and then developed by many others over the past 50 years. Yeah. So I guess they had to give Gary and Dave credit, but this is as far as they were willing to go. Cale Stutzman, director of digital game design for D&D, is one of the additional consultants. So there you are. That's from my contact. And essentially, Cale Stutzman is accredited as leading the design of the digital evolution of Dungeons and Dragons across multiple projects. That's from their LinkedIn. And they're also involved with UX. I'm not sure what UX is. Oh, UX design. Sorry, my contact had. I should have kept reading. UX design is usually aimed at digital experiences and involves working with UI designers for apps and websites. Another one of these consultants is James Rose, who is a senior UX designer at Wizards of the Coast and listed as in LinkedIn as currently part of the newly formed D&D digital team. Another one of the consultants, Sarah Benjamin, works for a company called UX is Fine. And her expertise, according to LinkedIn, is creating mobile apps and digital experiences. UX Fine is owned by Jason Schklar, who is also listed on the credits. So aside from the cultural consultants, it looks like the main consultants have nothing to do with game design and everything to do with WotC going digital. So they're probably listed in the PHP because they worked with teams putting it together to make the UI for the VTT. Mark Hagen, apparently, if some of you play Magic, you might potentially be familiar to him because he is apparently the VP of collectibles for Magic the Gathering. So what's he doing consulting for the D&D, for the one D&D edition? Well, his job is collectible strategy for Magic. So he is probably working on stuff, according to my contact, like digital dice and digital miniatures. So this is the dirt, the inside dirt that I have gotten about who some of these people are. And it tells you very directly that the tabletop book publishing is not high on their list of priorities. Neither is good game design, though, of course, part of that is because they're just, most of what they're doing is just starting with 5th edition, and then they're going to add some other stuff that'll make it worse, but they didn't have to redesign the core from scratch like they did after 4E, which was a complete disaster, right? Because in this case, what they're trying to do is build on what is actually a very successful system. One more little detail is that there's a guy called James Mendez Hodes, who said, on Twitter, he said, I was a consultant on Player's Handbook. Henceforth, every time you play D&D and no one is racist, that was me. You're welcome. So there's an example of one of the cultural consultants. This is what they care about. It's going to suck, and it's not actually going to be a tabletop RPG anymore, but it's going to be given the seal of not racist by DEI experts. Let's see what you guys are talking about here, trying to catch up. Undead Fred says, look at my cleavage was always a personal favorite. Undead Fred said, what's crazy is remember the love letter that was in 3rd edition to Gary, Dave, and others at the start of the book? Yeah, you're not going to get that here. Even though this is supposed to be the 50th anniversary edition. John Edgar says, good evening, Pundit, and greetings, chat. Sorry I'm late. Well, I'm glad you're here. We've been going for 1 hour and 40 minutes, more or less, now, because we started late. Undead Fred says, now they can't say Gary Gygax without venom dripping from their mouths. Yeah, absolutely true. Steambub says, how much do you think 5.5e is going to fail? Well, that's a very good question. As I've said, obviously, because people are stupid and completist, the books themselves, the 3 core books themselves, are undoubtedly going to sell better than they've been selling recently at anything else, right? So like you have that whenever a new edition comes out, that there's a temporary boost of people who want to give it a chance, right? Just like when the first episode of a Star Wars series comes out, even though everybody knows at this point it's going to be complete garbage, there are still people who are going to watch it just on the vain hope that it could be good, right? And then there's people who watch it because, as someone pointed out, they're kind of autistic and they can't help themselves because they see Star Wars there and that's their thing that they have to see, right? Even though the last 8 Star Wars shows that they've seen and they've hated, So there is going to be some of that. But then after that, it's going to entirely depend on the virtual tabletop. The system itself won't be the thing that matters. The books won't matter. What'll matter is whether they can get a VTT that actually works and that people actually want to play, or if it's all going to be crap, in which case things are going to collapse very quickly, you know. So the problem is it doesn't really matter now what the game is as a game. It matters whether it works as a digital experience. $5 super chat from Disco Barbarian. Congratulations, Pundit. Here's to many more. Thank you very much, Disco Barbarian. I really appreciate it. Your super chats keep Meatball supplied with tuna, so she is very grateful as well, wherever she is. You'd think she'd be grateful enough to show up and give you guys a cameo at least, but like I said, it's cold and she's probably buried under some blanket or something. Frank Destrosa says there's abundant racism at my table. We all hate orcs, elves hate dwarves, dwarves hate elves, humans dislike them all. Rushok says, I wonder if there'll be a 20-page preamble about how the DM has to accommodate every kind of sensuality at the table. Well, what I can tell you is that obviously, like even the major rules changes largely have to do with incorporating woke concepts, right? That's why they're getting rid of races in the sense of race mattering at all in the game, right? And so like any race can have any ability and things like that, and no race has any disadvantages, right? Those are long since gone. That's also why they're essentially getting rid of alignment. But I think besides that, a lot of the difference in the context is going to just be that kind of stuff, is saying, oh, well, you know, you don't have to do an adventure where you go out and kill humanoids because that's, you know, colonialist, and instead you could do something where the player characters have to understand them and then be able to integrate them into, you know, into the wider society or something like that, you know, recognize their own the evils of their own kingdom or something bullshit like that is going to be a very big part of the deal, without a doubt, you know. Hammerhead Starcraft says, I hear monks are better now. That's good. Well, you know, I've never really gotten why there's monks there at all, but I don't think any of them are as good as the Silk Road Sage class from Sword and Caravan. Yeah, I guess that was the stuff I wanted to share with you guys at the moment. Taking a look here at the RPG site to see if there was anything else I wanted to bring up. So there's a thread on the RPG site about how Mike Merles has been partially erased from the D&D credits, in that he was very much the lead of 5e and is now presented as if he wasn't. See if there's anything else here. So I think sadly that, because actually 5e, I know it's not likely to be your favorites. It's not my favorite game. It's not a game that I play, even though I helped make it. But But 5e was actually, as far as the 3 core books were concerned, they were actually quite well designed, right? Like the player's handbook, in some ways, was the least interesting of the 3. The monster manual was quite well designed. It was very functional as a monster manual, and it had some very interesting details. And the DM's guide was, to me, one of the best DM's guides ever put out as an official D&D product. Like, not as good, obviously, as like the first edition AD&D DM's guide, and maybe not as good as the DM section of the Rule Cyclopedia, but it was quite up there, right? Like, it had tons of really useful resources for the DM and ways that the DM could modify the game to suit his style and his preferences. And that's what a DM's guide should be. And of course, I suspect that in this case, the player's handbook will be perhaps the least horrifying of the 3 new books. And the DM's guide will be the worst, right? Because they're going to remove almost all of the really useful stuff and replace it with a bunch of ridiculous hipster woke garbage. So that is an absolute pity. Eric G, $5 super chat. Thank you so much. Meatball, thanks you for the tuna. Looking at the future, most of the SJWs are going to be betrayed by the very regime they grovel to. Why do communists always eliminate useful idiots? Well, that's what you do with a useful idiot after they're not useful anymore, right? Why would you want them around? These are all the people that think that after the revolution, they're going to be paid to be philosophers, right? Other people will have to work for them. But, you know, the people that have the actual guns will probably say, no, I don't think we're going to do that. Frank DeStrosa says, Pundit, don't forget to mention the excellent Bill the Elf channel. Everyone should listen just for the voice acting alone. Yeah, well, if you're not aware of it, there's a channel on YouTube called Bill the Elf that is run by the guy who plays Bill the Elf in my Last Sun campaign, and it consists of audio recordings, audio-only recordings, of all of our World of the Last Sun sessions. So if you want to see how I DM a Gonzo campaign, it's very different from how I DM a medieval authentic campaign. But the way I DM a Gonzo campaign, you can go check out his channel, check out his videos. There, it's just the raw, uncensored footage of us running the game, and it's usually pretty hilarious to us, and apparently to the fans that actually watch or listen to the Bill the Elf channel. They tend to appreciate it. So yeah, it is a great resource to check out if you want an idea of my DMing skills, at least when it comes to the weirdest, but also the longest and most successful campaign I've ever run. Luis Rivera, $4.99. Thank you so much, Luis, and Meatball also thanks you. Any thoughts on Harn or Harnmaster? Looking forward to the Lion and Dragon Dark Albion hardcover. Well, the Lion and Dragon Dark Albion hardcover, I can't say when it's going to come out. My suspicion is sometime next year, assuming that the publisher is on track and everything works out. But it looks like it will. It looks like it's going to happen. As far as Harnmaster, I've never much liked the mechanics of Harnmaster as a system. In terms of Harn as a setting, it's a very interesting setting because it is one of the precursors, in a way, of the stuff I do, in that Harn was a much more historically authentic setting in certain ways than most other RPGs, certainly most other RPGs of its time. It wasn't perfect, but it was quite good in terms of the kind of physical and social structures of what would have been a late Dark Ages or very early medieval society. Where it fell apart was probably in that it didn't have monotheism, and that was one of the big areas where you have this incongruity, right? So it's almost like closer to like if the Vikings had conquered England and then they were worshiping pagan gods, right? But it was still it was still certainly much more authentic. However, I have to say that in terms of, first of all, the structure of like how Hard World was designed as a product made it very difficult for me, at least, to get into. Right, like it was way it was way too encyclopedic and didn't really give you a good core starting point. One of the things that Dark Albion does is, because it's the War of the Roses, that gives you a big starting point, right? And of course, because Harn is a fantasy world with medieval elements, what you really need to have is something that is a much closer parallel to be able for a gamer. This is part of why I think Harn never was as successful as it could have been. You need to be able to create a context that the players will have as an introductory idea of what to be doing there, and I don't think they were very good at that, because they were all like the core set, the Harn World set was all over the place. So it had some flaws that meant that it never ended up being as successful as it might have been. Bob Burr says, I haven't looked through Baptism of Fire, but are the equipment prices based in real life period prices or more game prices? No, they are based as much as was possible on real life period prices. However, I have to state in this context, because I don't know if you've got Lion and Dragon. If you have Lion and Dragon, you would know that where is Lion and Dragon? Oh, there it is. So in Lion and Dragon, I have the economics section there. I have prices. Those prices are very, very much based on actual price lists of things of the era. Even there's enormous amounts of what do you call it? Of me having to make specific calls, because over the course of the Middle Ages, prices varied wildly, right? And so this is the closest I could get to what I thought were the correct price lists in shillings, pennies, and pounds of medieval goods based on historical sources. The problem with Baptism of Fire is that there are the amount of sources of early Poland are tiny compared to the vast amount of sources that you have for medieval England, for late medieval England, right? Because you'd kind of run into the same problem if you were doing this, like if Lion and Dragon was set in 10th century England, the way Baptism of Fire is set in 10th and 11th century Poland. But there are very, very few sources there. So a lot of this has. Sorry, I think we blooped there. A lot of it has to become much more speculative. And so part of what I had to do was kind of look comparatively at prices that were in areas that weren't actually Poland, right? So in like Germany and stuff like that. And so there's quite a bit more of me making gut calls about what the prices are. But the prices are not designed for gameability. They're not designed in that, if a player character starts with 3d10 times 10 denarii, then a sword should be 10 denarii. It wasn't that. It was still trying to get the closest prices of what you get. And so, like, if you're used to D&D, what you see in both Baptism of Fire and Lion and Dragon is that some of the prices are very different than what you're going to get if you're, doing the standard D&D Waterdeep prices or something like that. So, for example, weapons are relatively inexpensive, unless they're silver. If you get a silver weapon, it's much more expensive than anything else, right? But armor is fairly expensive. Armor was a lot more expensive than weapons. And even shields were quite expensive for them to be really, if they were functionally good shields. And there's other stuff similar to that, like you realize the real value of a horse by the comparative prices that you had at the time. Obviously, food was relatively inexpensive, as were quite a bit of services, but costs of construction were very high. So there's a variety of things there that make the economics of the game look very different than if you're just running a game set in in Greyhawk or in the Forgotten Realms. Let me see here. Undead Fred says, what do you think of the older team turn style of Team A moves, Team B moves, Team A takes action, Team B takes action, a spell resolves? Well, you're talking there about the order of combat in the basic expert, the BECMI rules. And those are okay. They're not bad. I personally, and in my game, obviously, if you know how my initiative rules work, I've settled on preferring a system of individual initiative, right? Which means that some player characters roll high initiative, and what that does is it favors the characters who have initiative bonuses, right? Because otherwise, there's not really much of a point in having initiative bonuses or things like that. So that means one of the features of certain classes can be that they are faster in acting than other classes. And that can be useful because it means that in any given combat, depending on what you roll, some player characters will be going before any of the opponents. Some of them will be going in between the opponents. Some of them will be going after the opponents. Or maybe they all roll really badly and the opponents all go first. Francis Joe says X9 Prime Pundit could have been a voice actor for sure. Well, thanks for that, Frank. I'm pretty good with voices, I think, and with accents, and I guess that comes through in the Bill the Elf channel. So yeah, it is one of the skills that I've used a lot as a DM. Yeah, so I guess I've covered everything I wanted to cover for tonight. But if you guys have any additional questions to ask right now, I'll give you guys the time it takes for me to clean up a couple of pipes here to give you last minute subjects if you want to try to bring some up. Flint Fireforge says, really enjoyed the chat. I'm going to get some sleep. Thanks again, Pundit. Or congrats again, Pundit. Thank you very much. Bob Bursch says, yes, a lot of fantasy worlds have economies based on nothing in particular. Why would you not gather and store fallen warriors' weapons and armor? Because that's the main cost beyond training and housing. Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of in the original context, the price lists in things like Blackmoor and Greyhawk were largely just based on a kind of winging it of what people thought, what the designers, like Gary and Dave, thought were kind of a good starting price list for the 3d6 times 10 gold pieces that a starting adventurer had, so that you would when you were starting out, you'd have to make decisions of what armor, what weapon do I buy, what equipment do I buy, because I can't buy it all. And the prices were made to kind of reflect that in a way that was focused on resource management and playability, so that you would have a situation of certain weapons being more expensive than others because they did more damage than others or something like that, you know. But in my games, at least my historical authentic games, the intention is that the items be priced according to what the actual economy would demand that they be priced. Frankistor says, I laughed so hard at the Last Sun campaign. I'm way too involved. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Every day I ask myself where Mendez is. That is funny. That shows you that you've been watching it or listening to it either for a long time or you've been mass listening to it now, because I think it was like, what, 3-4 years ago that was the joke. There's one character, this NPC named Gorp, that was looking for a guy named Mendez and was sort of obsessed with this guy Mendez, and the joke is he never shows up, right? Rushak says, just wanted to say I really enjoyed your cult book. Cults of Chaos. Yes. Well, that is one book that I'm really proud of. You know, I've become gradually better and better at doing random tables. There's some kick-ass random tables in Sword and Caravan and Baptism of Fire and random generators, right? But this was like the first time. This was a moment where like something clicked in my head, and I said, I've been making random tables, but you can also make random generators, which are, you know, cascades of random tables that can be used to create setting or to create adventures, you know. And I think that's one of the really secret skills of an OSR game designer that is very worthwhile learning. So thank you. I appreciate that you like Cults of Chaos. I think it's in the context of what it's made for, it's one of my best products. It lets you design an enemies group and an adventure around that enemies group in minutes that you can then immediately jump into as a session, you know. Jeff Adamo says, I was under the impression food is pretty strikingly expensive in the Middle Ages compared to today. Well, that's actually true if you look at the typical wage of a peasant or poor city dweller, right? Food is very expensive for those people. But the presumption being that most of the player characters are not that lowest level of peasant or grodnik, to use the Baptism of Fire term. It means that, you know, food is not usually a big problem for player characters to get. But yes, you're right. I mean, like, you look at the average, because there are average wage lists there, and if you look at those average wage lists, you would say that like a day laborer is literally living from one loaf of bread to the next, pretty much. Undead Fred says, I price everything in the game off the principle that the value of gold is static and that everything's relative to that, so I just valued all in ounces of gold. That's fair enough, except that in the Middle Ages, gold was hardly ever used in coin at all, right? Like the pound was silver. It was a pound of silver. That was the principle of it. Because there was very, very little gold around. There wasn't that much silver either, but there was enough silver that could be the monetary standard. So in fact, when you set it on the gold standard, you immediately distort the context of what a medieval society would have had, right? Gold was just out of this world expensive in contrast. X9 Prime says, Baptism of Fire by Andrzej Sapkowski. Is there some co-collaboration names? No, I actually had no idea, because again, I've never read any of the Witcher novels or any of that. I had no idea that one of these novels was called Baptism of Fire when I chose that title. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, who cares, right? But my publisher didn't know it either. So like literally, like it's Baptism of Fire because it's an RPG about the baptism of Poland, about the Christianization of Poland, right? Which was an extremely tumultuous era. It was not an easy Christianization, right? There was a ton of back and forth. There was essentially terrible warfare between pagans and Christians, and it was a really violent affair. But it also is what forged Poland as a nation, because before that there wasn't a Poland. There was a bunch of different weirdo Slavic tribes that were united ultimately by Christianity. Luis Rivera says, "Is there another historical setting or genre that you would like to explore?" Well, yeah, there are a few historical genres and settings that I would like to explore. Like I said, if I go back to England at some point in my design, I will probably be doing a setting book about the anarchy, which is also a very interesting time period. I've been saying that for a long time now, and again, I didn't know that there was a Game of Thrones thing that was essentially inspired by the anarchy. Obviously, now I do because it's House of the Dragon or whatever. I would probably at some point like to try to do a Song Dynasty setting book, which would of course fit right in with Sword and Caravan because Song Dynasty exists in the time of the Sword and Caravan setting. Though it won't exist for a lot longer past the timeline of the Sword and Caravan setting. Well, those are the two that I'm kind of the most interested in considering overall at the moment. But I'm sure that there will be other historical settings that I would think of trying in the future as well. Besides that, other genres, well, like I said, I do really want to do a space opera setting for Star Adventurer. And so, Sons of Heaven is the concept behind that, and maybe that will end up coming out as a large number of Pundit Files issues and then be compiled into into its own book, right? That's possible. I would really like to do a kind of quasi cyberpunk setting, except that I think that it would be super political because a cyberpunk setting has to be dystopian and political, and I would suspect that that would be one of the problems of like the publishing of it. So this is a kind of, because what I don't want to do is just create one that's like the 1980s cyberpunk. If I was going to do a cyberpunk, I'd want it to be a projection of a possible future dystopia. And that sort of future dystopia would probably have to be kind of like the dystopia that we would have if the World Economic Forum wins, like that sort of thing. And so it would be, there'd be no way that it wouldn't be seen as a political diatribe, which it sort of would be, right? It would have to be, but that's part of the setting. So I keep like hesitating even thinking about doing something like that because obviously, I mean, I don't know if it would even be allowed on drive-through, right? If I did it in a really honest way, right? Because it would be seen as anti-leftist propaganda. And somebody says, "Don't forget the Western." Yeah, well, I'm slower to want to do a Western setting because there are already some good Western games out there, right? But yes, I could certainly end up writing a Wild West campaign book. I mean, I ran a Wild West campaign that was, by the way, like entirely historical, right? It wasn't like based on Wild West movies. It was based on things that actually happened in the Wild West, and it had no like magical powers, nothing supernatural in it, none of that, right? Jeff Adamo says, you should write books of history for gamers. I thought I already was. Isn't that what I'm doing right now? Like, I've had a number of people say, I've, they'll say something like, oh, I played in your Lion and Dragon campaign, and I think I know more about like 15th century England than people who are studying history in my at the college, or whatever. Another one I might do at some point is a game set in the Roman Empire. That's another possibility. Rich S, $5. Thank you so much. I enjoy your channel. Congrats on 8K. That is all. I appreciate it a lot. Uncle Dwaylen says, hey, Pundit, been running Star Adventure for a few months now, having an actual blast. The party is largely made up of burger flippers and losers desperately trying to get a spaceship mortgage. That sounds awesome, man. That sounds like just great, And well, I hope they end up getting their spaceship. That's very funny. Steambub says, good 20 minutes into the future cyberpunk is always political. Yeah, it has to be. Otherwise, it's just nothing, right? Hammerhead Starcraft says, Red Room would sell it, though. Yeah, they probably would. Yeah, I suppose. Maybe they'd even publish it. Steambub says, do a Western and make Mexican orcs great again. Well, I guess I could do a fantasy Western, but I don't know if that would be something I'd be as keen on doing. Steambub says, what about that song China setting? Well, yeah, I'm very interested in doing one at some point. I would find it very interesting because they are my favorite Chinese dynasty. Agile Monk says, congratulations on your 8,000. Thank you so much. Calvin I says, song would fit diversity requirements. Yeah. Well, the song were the most technologically and socially advanced civilization of their time that had ever existed at their time. And they were the most advanced that would exist until basically the Age of Enlightenment in Western Europe, which was, 500 years after they were gone. So that is they are like absolutely remarkable, invented a ton of stuff. And if you, in Sword and Caravan and in Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road, you have examples of some of the high-tech items that the Song Dynasty created. But besides that, it was also like the peak of Chinese civilization, of Chinese philosophy. It was the peak period of kind of their art and social culture. You could debate that with poetry, maybe the Tang were more famous poets, but there was a lot of like amazing stuff that was going on with the Song Dynasty. It was also the time that like the very first beginnings of modern martial arts came into existence. There were a few things before that, but some of the earliest, oldest styles of what are today martial arts in China were from the Song Dynasty. Dreander says, I just finished the Mahabharata. I'm at the stage where I'm still absorbing it all. I ordered Arrows of Indra. Is there any reading you would recommend to further enrich the experience? Well, I mean, if you've read the entire Mahabharata, there's not much else I can really recommend to you. I mean, if you're interested in the philosophical spiritual side of it, then the Bhagavad Gita, I guess, if you want to look at some of the particular mythology of Krishna, the Srimad Bhagavatam, but the Mahabharata, yeah, not a lot of people read the entire Mahabharata, so you have my respect there. It took me a very long time, and it is a very, I mean, it is the epic. That's, I mean, yeah. There's the Ramayana also, obviously, but to me, the Mahabharata is absolutely where it's at when it comes to Indian epics. Uncle Dwaylen says they're getting closer to that spaceship every session. That's good. With the occasional setback. One of the initial characters is serving 36 years for attempted murder, and now they've stumbled into a gang war. That sounds like one hell of a Star Adventure campaign, my dude. That is excellent. One of my projects I want to do, says Steambub, is a Wuxia Jiangquan cultivation OSR game with a sectoral generator right now, just collecting themes and tropes of the genre. That is interesting. I did, as you know, besides having the Chinese Sage class in Sword and Caravan, I also have the Pundit Files #3, which is the Song Martial Artist class. So that would be my model of the kind of a not too unrealistic wuxia martial artist, right? And I am, in fact, one of the future issues of the Pundit Files is going to be more medieval Chinese martial arts. Because in the Song Martial Artist class, I give you the class itself, and then I present to you the four styles of Master Zhu Tong, who was one of the most famous martial artists of the Song Dynasty. But then in the next one, I'm going to have another 5 styles that were from the period of the Song or earlier, that you can add as additional martial arts styles. So yeah, that is stuff that will no doubt end up being part of the Song Dynasty campaign book. All right. Well, I guess we're wrapping it up here. Thank you again to everybody who has watched the live stream. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who sent super chats. I appreciate it, and Meatball certainly appreciates the tuna. So she's wherever she is, I'm sure she's very grateful. Be sure to like the video and share it anywhere that you can. And subscribe. Obviously, if you haven't subscribed, this is the 8,000 subscriber live stream. If you're on here and you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. In fact, let me check just to see here. Has anyone subscribed from when we started? My guess is no. Oh, yeah, one person. There has been at least one subscriber from the time that we started this live stream until now. Very nice. All right. I don't know who it is, but very good. So I really appreciate that. And be sure to check out all of my products. If you click the more button in the description, you will see links to all of my products: Baptism of Fire, the Pundit Files, Sword and Caravan and its source books, the Gonzo Fantasy Companion, and World of the Last Sun. All the stuff we've been talking about, plus a few we didn't get to, like the Invisible College, and Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion, obviously. So be sure to check all of those out. I'm pretty sure that you will all appreciate the product, not just, you're not, hopefully you're not just buying it as a show of support, though if you are, I would thank you for that. But I am confident that if it's a topic that you think is interesting, you're going to get a very good product out of that topic, because all the stuff I write is stuff I use, and so I know that it's playable stuff, and obviously other people have played it too and enjoyed it. So be sure to check all of that out. In particular, my newest stuff, Baptism of Fire, which has been a bestseller for weeks and for a couple of months. And the Pundit Files, which if you don't have a lot of cash, but you can get someone to give you about $3.50, then you can pick up an issue of the Pundit Files. They're only available at the Red Room, and they only cost $3.50. So be sure to check that out. All right, guys. Currently smoking nothing because I finished my last pipe, but I'm about to start smoking this Hawkbill plus Argento Roots. Take care, everyone.